Thank you very much. I'm Susie Watford and I'm Chief Strategy Officer here at the Washington Post. In today's rapidly changing world, business leaders face unprecedented challenges at every turn. The Executive Leadership Council, or the ELC, is an independent non-profit founded in 1986 that opens channels of opportunity for the development of global executives to positively impact businesses and communities. And the ELC recently completed its second annual Voice of the Member survey, gathering insights from over 200 C-suite executives and board members across Fortune 500 companies and non-profits. And the survey explored strategic priorities, the most valuable skills, and organizational readiness for the future. With us today to discuss these findings is Michael C. Heiter, President and CEO of the ELC. He's a long-term expert on leadership and business, and Mike has held executive roles at Korn Ferry, Global Novations, and currently sits on the board of Dine Brands Global, Inc. He's also authored several books, including The Power of Choice, Embracing Efficacy to Drive Your Career. Mike, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you. Thank you. I was going to say my mother thanks you for that intro.
Well, look, I mean, we've heard a lot already this morning, but the ELC released its second annual Voice of the Member survey today. What did you choose, or why did you choose to focus the survey on business priorities over the next 2 to 3 years? And kind of what from the findings stood out to you most?
Well, we wanted to capture what today's needs were from a leadership perspective. And we wanted to hear from the leaders themselves about what the priorities were, considering the economy and all of the changes and things that are going on around us. And we thought that information would also help us then highlight where there's areas of opportunities for leaders to be more competitive and more forward-thinking as a result of learning about what they are collectively said. So that was the primary impetus behind it.
And you've called this an era defined by disruption. I think we've heard some of that this morning. Right. But what do you mean by that exactly? Well,
disruption, which is the operative word, I think, for everything that we're dealing with right now, it used to be an event, and it used to be something that happens on occasion, and then we adjust.
Return to normal, yeah.
Now it's the environment. I mean, basically everything is disruptive. And managers and leaders in particular just need to sort of appreciate the fact that it is not a temporary phenomenon, but a permanent one. And so the backstory behind decisions ought to be influenced by the fact that disruption is going to happen as opposed to avoiding it. So disruption is the centerpiece, in my judgment, about what's different in the mindset of leaders, or at least what should be different about in the mindset of leaders as we're entering the eras that we're in now, business-wise. But it's disruptive is disruption, but it's constant.
It's the constant.
Right.
And the data highlights really that there's a leadership pipeline gap, where most executives actually say that that kind of senior sponsorship is the best way to develop leaders and future talent. But the research shows that fewer are actually doing it. Why is that gap so persistent, and what's at risk if we don't address it?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. I mean, for the record, sponsorship is the most effective, impactful way of developing leadership talent. But as you referenced in the question, it happens far less often than it should. Mm-hmm. I think partly it's time-consuming and requires intentionality. Mm-hmm. And in high-pressure environments, which a lot of business organizations are in right now, it becomes something that you just don't spend a lot of time thinking about because of the time commitment that it typically takes. It doesn't take as much time as we tend to think. But it really, really is important. You know, the positioning individuals in situations where their experiences reflect the pace and the complexity of what is required for leaders going forward, and being in a position where you can influence that person having that opportunity to do that is huge. What has happened in the past is, in the absence of sponsorship, people tend to think, well, if she or he have this one job, they'll eventually get promoted to another one, and it'll take care of itself. But someone who's maybe 3 or 4 levels away from that particular person, sees potential and has the influence to say, but a global assignment in this particular country will actually sweeten the opportunity for him or her to be able to do this next assignment and be in a position to help make that happen. Is a transformative experience in terms of development.
So you have to be way more intentional about it, and, and saying it when
and
you see it.
And what's missed if you don't do it is to miss out on the opportunities for what I call future-proofing with people in advance of needing them.
That makes sense. And you've talked about that, actually, that the need to future-proof leadership. What does that mean, and how can organizations kind of start developing the kind of leaders that the moment and this disruption and the future actually demand?
Future-proofing, I had to promise to make sure I could say that clearly right now. Future-proofing is basically developing talent to be able to anticipate and thrive in uncertainty. I mean, that's what future-proofing is. And the muscle memory and the experience to be able to thrive in uncertainty is something that is developable. And the more people who have that or are the beneficiary of that, what I call future-proofing, the more effective they'll be as leaders in the disruptive environment that I'm trying to describe earlier. So that's what future-proofing means.
Yeah. And you've said that organizations that really rise to meet that moment will define that future.
Right.
How do you feel about the future generations of leadership, and what gives you hope?
What gives me hope? No, I'm just kidding. You know, actually, the next gen's mindset, they're bold, curious, motivated to lead differently. I mean, they're just wired to lead differently. It's just something about the curiosity, and I find next gen talent tends to appreciate that leadership does mean authority, but adaptability is actually more important than authority. And given the disruptive nature and the certainty of what I call permanent motion of craziness, that, you know, with market changing and policy changes and consumer expectations shifting, having people with that orientation leading through that disruption increases the likelihood of future-proofing at a real high level. Investing in people with that type of capability is one of the best investments any organization can make in terms of protecting its future.
And it's interesting because organizations are managing, aren't they, like 5 different generations sometimes?
Yes, and for the first time in our history, all 5 generations, and if anyone in the room has experience with adult children that range in those ages, they all think differently. The values, things that are motivating are different, but they're all motivated by different things. And now we, as leaders, have to navigate through that maze of differences in ways I don't think leaders typically thought about in the past, but it's a very, very important piece of being successful and disruptive now.
I was going to say, and is that one of the, when you think about the challenges that leaders face now compared to even just a few years ago, that kind of intergenerational workforce is one area. What other challenges do you see that people are dealing with now in leadership that are perhaps different? I think
what's different now is leadership is more than just setting a course. You know, it was set a course and everybody follow me. Leadership is a lot more related to, we're going to have to deal with anything we don't see coming, guys and ladies. We're going to make left turns without plans. We're going to have to make decisions with less certainty of outcomes. That's fundamentally different in terms of how leadership
Read that
is sort of
training that
wired.
Sally was talking about
That's
earlier.
why it was
Yeah.
amazing what she
Yeah.
was saying. So that's fundamentally different today, but it matches the moment where organizations are
Yeah.
existing.
And you touched on this a bit when we talked about how do you manage the urgent and the important. So
Yeah.
whether that's kind of looking after future talent, but that balance of short-term performance and those demands with the long-term goals that reflect organizational values and stakeholder expectations. How should people think about balancing those?
Carefully. I mean, that's a reality. I mean, it's like parallel tracking is again the new norm, and you have to be intentional about it. I mean, synthesizing data, check. That's a very important element of successfully leading something. Being able to lead through challenges, but at the same time, meet the needs of your team members, meet the needs of those that you're dependent on to get the work done. You have to do all of it at the same time, as opposed to in steps. And so it requires, I guess, what do you call it, walking and chewing gum at the same time, kind of dexterity. But that's the new sort of dynamic now that everybody's in. You can't leave. Although it's interesting, the data would suggest like AI, strategic agility, a technical agility is more prominent, and ability to work through disruption is more prominent than people management is presumed to be. But the development of team members while doing those things to prepare them to be eligible to take the organization to the next level is critical, and you have to do it in real time. You can't send someone to a class and expect that to work the same way it used to.
I thought we were going to get through a whole session without talking about AI, but you said it, so let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Did that come up in the survey?
It did, and much to I guess I shouldn't say surprise, but it was defined as a much more prominent priority in the mindsets of executives, even more so than market, regulatory, and supply chain risk as a thing that requires a lot more time and attention going forward. And I think part of it is just the fact that things are happening so quickly, and AI is a significant sort of arbiter between making access to information faster in a way where you have to react to it faster. But people see that that's a significant piece of what success is going to look like as a leader. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you one final question,
Sure.
but the survey really does reveal that kind of clear shift that leaders need. Tech fluency, as we've talked about with AI, strategic ability, and adaptive thinking all kind of now outrank those traditional strengths like people management, or do they? But what does it tell us about how leadership is evolving and what's going to matter for the future?
Well, what's going to matter for the future is that leadership still matters. It's not machines or strategies or flow charts that are going to actually make a difference. Leading and developing people in the face of all of what's going on around us is the only way that this is really going to be something that you can thrive in as an organization.
That feels like an appropriate place to end, given the subject and why we're all here today. So Thank you so much. Thank you for that perspective. Stay right there, everybody, because I'm going to hand back to my colleagues in the newsroom. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Thank you, Susie. Thank you.